Senator Young, delighted to have you, honored to have you here at Betting on America, sir. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, thanks for having me, Navin. Good luck to you in this podcast series, and I am privileged to be your first guest.
Thank you, sir. You have led the national conversation on U.S. technology leadership for many, many years and have been instrumental in legislation that is really part and parcel of the U.S. economic security toolkit. And you continue to shine a light on the tech competition with the PRC. And that race, as many of us know, is accelerating, with China showing us that it can increasingly innovate at scale and rapidly across a number of technologies, whether it's AI, life sciences, clean tech, and others. And so I guess I'd like to start there and ask you to help us understand really what is at stake in the competition with China for our economy and for our people. And practically, what does it mean to fall behind?
Yes. Well, thank you, Navin, once again for having me on. Thanks for that question. You've begun with sort of the threshold question. Why does this matter? What is this competition all about? The pace of innovation is rapidly changing, and it's quickening, and can be challenging for regular people like myself to keep up. But we know a few things. We know that our ability to innovate will drive future economic growth and therefore material prosperity. So we have to lead the way as it relates to that. That material prosperity is by extension necessary to fund our most essential priorities, including our national defense, so that we can defend our values and our way of life. We also know that today's innovation informs innovation within the military and the future of warfare. So our ability to stay on the leading edge in various emerging technologies, from semiconductors to biotechnology to drones and far more, will directly impact the ability of our warfighters to be successful if God forbid, they're called upon to defend our values. And then lastly, our ability to lead in innovation all the way up to manufacture and deployment of today's technologies, artificial intelligence in particular, will influence our ability to also shape standards, standards within those technologies, and to harmonize those standards with our friends who share our values around the world. And if we can win the standards game, then the Chinese, over a period of many years, will decide they'll have to adopt our standards. If instead they decide to adopt their own techno-autocratic standards, which embed their values around transparency and privacy and consumer protection and all the rest, then they essentially would have to produce for one set of standards for export, another set of standards for domestically, and that would be unsustainable over the longer term. So all of this comes back to how do we harness the best of our system, optimize it for this techno-economic competition, and protect our people, defend our way of life, and win this generational struggle against autocracies.
It's a powerful way in which you describe that. How would you say we are stacking up against the PRC right now across some of these important technology areas?
Well, as it relates to semiconductors, I think we continue to lead the way in many innovations. We've lost our manufacturing capability, which led to the need to claw back that expertise. Your listeners will recall that the United States of America, we were the home of semiconductor development, invention, and manufacturing for a number of years, but we took our eye off the importance of these critical technologies, and now we're having to claw them back, which can be expensive and disruptive, and we don't want to have insecure supply chains and be dependent on other countries or those dependencies will be revealed either through a natural disaster like the COVID pandemic, or instead there will be a geopolitical event, maybe catalyzed by our enemies, China, Russia, others, who will disrupt our access to these. And then you go to other technologies like biotech. I think most Americans, even most within the industry, would say we're ahead in biotech.
Yeah.
We've got the greatest biopharma companies in the world. We have an innovation base which is second to none. But in some areas of biotech, I've been chairing a National Security Commission on emerging biotechnology, and we'll produce our report probably in April of this year. We have found the Chinese are ahead of us, and they aim for dominance in this field as well through their unique economic model. So, listen, the Chinese they can put a lot of, as we said in the Marine Corps, a lot of lead on target. The weight of investment in this case in research can be very heavy because it's, government directed, and they're not subject to the whims of their people and so forth. We don't want to adopt that model.
Yeah.
And they can reward their innovative companies in certain ways that we can't reward our companies. But we have the broadest, deepest capital markets in the world.
Yeah.
We've got amazing and best-in-class research universities. We've got national labs that are highly impressive. We get, on and on. We have all these benefits, but we really do need to account for this new order in which the Chinese are looking for vulnerabilities, whether it's IP insecurity or extended supply chains, or their ability to subsidize certain components or certain products in ways that will put our companies out of business. And we need to account for those in our public policies. And we just have not done that. Yeah. And believe it or not, that could allow us to be outclassed in some of these national security relevant technologies. But we aim to avoid that situation.
Yeah. Well, it's a really important reminder. Let's not forget our strengths and strengths that have been built for 200 plus years. And those are the things that we should leverage. At the same time, it's good to weigh what I would say is the need for a it's already too late strategy. And you write about this in your piece in National Interest, the Tech Power Playbook. Before digging into some of the particulars, I'd love your high level on what are the key elements? What are the keys that we need to play on the keyboard with this playbook? Could you give us a high level on that, and then we can go into some of the particulars on chips and other things you're working on?
Well, I was trying to tease out of the Chips and Science Act lessons that I thought would be instructive, perhaps, to here and now. A new administration coming in with the Trump administration, a new Republican-controlled Congress. And there are a lot of varying opinions as it relates to the CHIPS Act. But I thought there were some important lessons that should not be forgotten. And I happen to believe the CHIPS Act has been more successful than I would have ever imagined. We've been able so far to unlock roughly $500 billion of private sector commitments. And I think roughly $30 billion of taxpayer money has actually flowed. So that's quite remarkable. And I expect, because we've begun this process of reshoring, not just big semiconductor fabricating facilities, but also the support infrastructure. And we've catalyzed the education of the next generation of technicians and designers and all the rest. We now will be an inviting country for future foreign direct investment and domestic investment. So those are the successes. But what has gone unheralded, I think until I wrote this essay in the National Interest, was the incredible work of our tech diplomats. Yeah. Our tech diplomats played a critical role in identifying the most vulnerable nodes to disruption, which would interrupt our access to semiconductors, whether they're the leading edge semiconductors used in weapon systems or instead more commoditized semiconductors, which are necessary for us to be able to assemble automobiles in this economy. They played a role in figuring out what those nodes were and identifying the best way to ensure that we could develop the redundancies and avoid these dependencies that are weaponized by the CCP and others. The other thing that our tech diplomats are equipped to do, and I hope they do it more in the future, is working on standards development. This could be especially important as we look to this age of AI and the increased need for semiconductors to create AI solutions. To the extent we can harmonize our standards, I spoke to this earlier, across international borders with our partners and our allies, there's a real geopolitical benefit to that. You can imagine them also playing a role in research collaboration and other important roles moving forward. And then, just a good in addition to them, and I say they're part of the special teams of this whole strategy. Let's play good offense and have a strong defense. Offense means that critical investment in our manufacturing capabilities for semiconductors. You could think about applying that model to other key technologies from quantum to biotechnology. And then having a strong defense means export controls. We don't want to have controls on the export of all technologies or all subsets of a technology. So we'll have some trade with the Chinese, of course, but we want to make sure that they don't have access to the best in class technologies at a given moment in time. In the case of semiconductors, we have mostly gotten right the export control regime, but that's sort of a moving target. And I want to encourage this administration to retain export controls and always trying to optimize the regime.
That's a really great rundown of the things that you've laid out there. This tech diplomats idea, phenomenal. I wish more people would pay attention to this because you make a really strong call for Secretary Rubio to think about what that looks like in the State Department. Of course, there's a Foreign Commercial Service in the Commerce Department. There is an XM Bank. There are all these tools available. They need to be organized in a way that will last for the next 20 years, for the next 30 years. You said it beautifully in the piece. You highlighted here. I just want to really foot stomp on this for folks who are listening. I think we need to focus on this because God knows the PRC is out there with their technology and economic diplomats or whatever you want to call them out there in countries, from countries in Africa all the way to countries in Europe. And we need the same. Yeah. So I just want to jump on that, Senator. I think it's a great idea.
And so my argument to the Trump administration, thank you so much, because really that was the genesis of this article. The domestic manufacturing play was getting a lot of attention in the press. I think President Biden talked a lot about it, understandably and appropriately. Export controls were well publicized, but for a very, very modest amount of money. Our tech diplomats, highly sophisticated, well-trained, were out in the field really making this whole thing possible. And, for those of us who think that trading with like-minded nations still makes sense in certain contexts, which is everyone I know.
Yeah.
I think leveraging the comparative advantage of our most trusted allies and partners is going to be essential here. It would be unrealistic to try and reshore everything here in the United States and probably suboptimal because costs would go way up at a time we're 100%. Trying to address inflation. So that's one piece of this. And I would also emphasize something, a value proposition I haven't mentioned. When you say foreign commercial service, digital trade is going to be very important to the health of our innovation ecosystem. So, in the end, our innovators need some markets to sell these things, and we need to keep grabbing market share. So the Foreign Commercial Service and our tech diplomats can be incredibly helpful, opening up foreign markets so that we can keep growing as it relates to our tech power.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things you said there. I just want to make sure we double click on a couple of these. One is you speak eloquently in the essay, and you have here about the role of trade, getting back to trade and in technology markets with our trusted allies, with like-minded partners, market-oriented economies, democracies, preferably. But we're in a different world right now when it comes to trade. You know, tariffs have gone into effect with Canada and Mexico. We are right in the midst of what could be a trade war. How should we think about this?
Yeah. Well, you know, so I would say this. You're absolutely right. We're in the midst of a different world, and there's a lot of justification for the world to be different. But I would say that we need to take advantage of those comparative advantages. Sounds like a abstract economic concept, but let me make it more real. Countries that violate the rules of free and fair trade, we need to stop trading with them on the same terms we've been trading with them. So I think that reset is entirely appropriate.
Yeah.
I also think that those countries are especially bad bets when it comes to trusting them to, for as counterparties or to do exchanges with them as it relates to our most critical technologies. And that's really my point of emphasis.
Right.
The last thing I would say is we need to be able to persuade our closest large economy, democratic country allies. That would be Japan.
Right.
That would be the Europeans and others to work with us in this tech effort. And when it comes to, say, export controls, to coordinate activities with them and vice versa. Otherwise, this is going to be a race to the bottom in which when one country imposes export controls, others go in and steal market share.
Right.
Right. So we have to act together, and that's how we bring bad countries into a position of better behavior.
Yeah.
And so that's how I'm thinking about it. In terms of particular tariff rates with particular countries, my hope is that these tariffs will be temporary and targeted. My hope is that the intention is to get our counterparties, say Canada, to the table so that we can negotiate either economic or non-economic issues. And then after we go through a negotiation and reach an outcome that is mutually acceptable with both sides, then we resume normal economic relations, knowing that if either side steps back into a position of misbehavior, there will be consequences. So that's my understanding of where we're headed.
Yeah.
And that's my hope, certainly.
Well, that really helps us make sense of things and gives us a longer-term perspective. I've always felt that with the tariffs, the enduring test of all these tariffs is going to ultimately be what you've talked about. How does it help us innovate better on technologies that are going to be important for shaping the future? Like, that's the enduring test for all of this stuff, and we should keep our eyes on the prize. And I think you've helped us think about how to do that. I also agree that something for something is good. It's like it can't be something for nothing. So there is value to the conversation that we're having right now. There's another piece to this, and I wanted to ask you, because you write about this in your essay and you've talked about this before. Internationally, either you give market access and you have trade, or you have deep pockets. Certainly the PRC offers both. And I remember working on the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and one of the constant refrains was, hey, it's either deep pockets or it's market access. And so you talk in your essay about the importance of financing for critical and emerging technologies and critical and emerging technology value chains. Everything from critical minerals to intermediate and end products. You talked about the role of the multilateral development banks that could be useful. I'm a 20-year ex-World Banker, and I'll tell you one thing is that you'll give me a second here because I want to get your thoughts on this. It's one thing to leverage those institutions, which we helped create, leverage them more aggressively, their balance sheets, so you could scale resources. But if we don't address problems on the back end, which is the lion's share of international competitive bidding on works is won by Chinese companies, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot. So I've wondered whether we need a financial engine, an American financial engine to help on critical and emerging tech around the world. Maybe that's DFC, maybe that's something else. What are your thoughts on this, Senator? And do I have this right?
Well, actually, I do think you have it right. I don't know that there's a particular appetite at this moment. In fact, I sense there's not a political appetite as more than the political environment could bear to propose creating a new entity. So whether that would be optimal or not, or I'll let others debate that point. But I think we have underutilized, and I make the argument, as you indicate in the national interest essay, we've underutilized the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and other such regional development institutions. We've not insisted that as we participate in these institutions and help fund them, that the leadership pursue strategies and policies that are consistent with our national interests.
Yeah.
We've really been inattentive, frankly, to the importance of them. And I think there's going to be a growing hue and cry in as early as the next couple of years by the Global South and others to have deeper participation in this tech revolution.
Yeah.
From artificial intelligence to emerging biotech and beyond. And we're going to have to work with them to figure that out. It will be advantageous to the United States to do so. And my hope is that these development banks can play a really important role, and that they'll look to American tech solutions moving forward. I actually think we failed to properly leverage American innovators and our private sector companies as well. There is an enormous opportunity for American companies to outflank China's Tech Belt and Road Initiative. If you look at East Africa, for example, the Chinese have been inserting themselves there. They've deployed Huawei solutions, and they aim to be the provider of choice of AI technology and move that region towards techno-autocratic solutions. And therefore have a measure of control over the information they have access to, and impose through regional leaders a economic and autocratic governance model. So that's of great concern to the United States. From a purely mercantilist perspective, we want our solutions there, right? We want Microsoft to partner with G42 to work with the Kenyan government to deploy solutions on the ground and be the first mover in Africa to provide regionally relevant and trained models to serve that population. And then we'll have an ongoing customer for our tech companies and be able to nudge those countries towards the values they probably prefer, all things equal. Those are the United States and our allies. So that's my vision. That's my private sector answer, properly scoped with the right regulatory environment, to the Chinese Belt and Road, big government, techno-autocratic model. And the development banks can augment these private investments so that the hurdle rate isn't as daunting and the payback is sooner than it would otherwise be. And I look forward to working on this in any way I can moving forward.
It is so great that you raised this. The technological analog to the Belt Road Initiative, which is what the Chinese are offering, is going to be our next big challenge. And I think you've really articulated it well. The dynamism of the U.S. private sector, our comparative advantage, our ability to build long-term relationships, particularly around technology. This is the future for a number of countries that could potentially be important export markets for us. So thank you so much, Senator, for raising that. Let me bring it back home to the U.S. and chips. You know, you talked about the CHIPS Act. You are a co-author of the CHIPS Act, bipartisan legislation. Again, greatly admire the work that you've done on that. Of course, President Trump voiced some opposition, at least to the use of subsidies to promote chip manufacturing. But I thought it's worth reflecting on, you know, what's actually been working. And you give some examples about, you mentioned some data already, but some examples in your writings about foreign direct investment in chips. And we're going to pull up a chart here on FDI in the semiconductor sector. And hopefully our folks can see this. What's really astounding, really since 2019, and then really in an accelerated way over the last few years, is FDI in semiconductor manufacturing in the US. Wow, look at these numbers relative to China. And I would add to this that at the 10th annual Select USA Summit last year, another $60 billion were committed in chip manufacturing in the US. So there's something significant happening here. And of course, we know about the TSMC announcement of $100 billion along with President Trump. All good news for the US. Tell us how we should think about this. Is this going to sustain? What is needed for it to sustain?
Well, the market demand is so you have the pull factor, right, of individual consumers increasingly wanting more chips or wanting the downstream product of the chips in the form of amazing new medicines developed with the help of AI solutions, and they want access to large language models, which are breathtaking in their application, or they want access to smart city technology paired with artificial intelligence so that we can eliminate traffic in this country. And you just go on and on. So I'm trying to make real and very accessible to regular people what this is all about. So we're going to get a lot more demand for chips, which is one of the reasons the imperative for passing this legislation was so great. Yeah. And our warfighters are going to need more chips to hopefully avoid conflict and to make us more secure in the event of any kind of potential conflict breaking out. So that's the demand factor. But will you see more investment in American production in particular? Absolutely. One of the reasons I believe that is because it takes a support ecosystem of service providers and component manufacturers and a whole support ecosystem every time a fab is located in this country. Yeah. Well, much of that support infrastructure is now in place through the previous administration's efforts, enabled by the CHIPS Act, working with private sector partners. We've gone through the hard work of getting essential pieces of this ecosystem to de-risk supply chains in this country. Mm-hmm. And many of those things won't have to be reconstituted or reshored to the United States every time a new fab or a new wing of a fab is planned here in this country. So that's point number one. Point number two is the American people are going to insist that their policymakers prepare us against the contingency of another mass interruption of a public health event like the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah. They've had a lot of years and a lot of us warning policymakers about the horrible scenario, what it could mean to our entire way of life if we don't have enough chips. So the political risk of failing to act and failing to ensure that we make more resilient our supply chain has really gone off the charts. So I think all of our leaders are resolved. Everyone in this administration wants to reshore semiconductor production. There may be some disagreements about exactly what that looks like, and there will no doubt be some changes that are brought to the Chips and Science Act. I frankly embrace some of those ideas.
Yeah.
But I think there should be little doubt that we will continue this very important effort that began in recent years.
Thank you for that, Senator. There's something else on this which I wanted to zoom in on, which is R&D. And you talked about the science part of the Chips and Science Act, which needs more attention. And I'm conscious of the fact that if you look at this chart, for example, public R&D, public investment in R&D has fallen since its peak in the 60s. It was about 1.8%, 1.86% of GDP to about a third, 0.66. And now, for sure, private sector R&D has grown significantly, but they may not be doing the same thing. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, completely agree. So thank you for starting there.
Yeah.
We invest in especially curiosity-driven, fundamental research, but even some applied research areas, especially in the physical sciences, for research which yields not just immediate private sector opportunities from time to time, but research that instead solves collective problems that won't be paid for by individual market players, individual consumers, or individual companies. So an example would be national security. We think nothing about paying a big defense contractor a bunch of money to build a ship, and we should not. I mean, we should scrutinize those investments and make sure they're absolutely necessary and appropriate. But the private economy is not going to build you Navy ships, right? That's a national shared priority.
Yeah.
You can think of public health. The same thing applies, and natural disaster avoidance and preparation. So there's these discrete research areas. And increasingly, to connect the dots here, our warfare, our method of warfare is dependent on dual use technology. So the fact that private investment's gone up is very important, but the public stuff is still essential, and this is an age of tech power.
Yeah.
So our entire military overmatch. It's been called the revolution in military affairs, and then there's been these various DoD offsets that we tried to out-innovate and out-compete our competitors through superior technology. Well, those are dependent on a lot of public investment, and that has been tapering off. So I would make that critical point. I'm also making the point, however, that we need to keep investing and incentivizing investment in private sector R&D, which is why I have led the R&D deduction legislation, so you still get tax benefits in this country from investing in R&D. And for pre-profitable companies, I think we could justify a tax credit for those companies. We need more innovation in this country, as much great innovation as we have. Subsidizing innovation in this country is something I absolutely agree with. And as a conservative, I was heartened that George Will wrote a column really applauding this idea not too long ago. And so there's a fair amount of support on both sides of the aisle for this. I think this will find its way, the tax provisions in the tax reform legislation that Congress is working on. But we still have some work to do in making the argument that these public research investments are important. Public health is one, I think, accessible example of where consistently we do this well and where our companies depend on research findings. Use the example of diabetes. In my family, we've had some folks who've had diabetes over the years, and they've been able to manage their condition through diabetes drugs that originated with findings that occurred through the National Science Foundation. It was the saliva of a Gila monster that somehow had the secret the secret sauce to allow us to control diabetes. So you just never know, even with some of these research studies that can be embarrassing, right? They end up oftentimes having a real logical rationale behind them. So I'll keep making that argument. The CHIPS and Science Act proposed increasing funding rather than seeing decreasing funding as we have since the space race occur through our important public institutions. And we do have a lot of public support for that. I'm starting to hear from the business community, and which is welcome, about how important their business models, especially Silicon Valley, are tied to public research at great universities like Stanford and so forth.
Well, I mean, just to underscore this, we are certainly in a period of government efficiency. There's a lot of vigorous effort around that, but we are also in an era of government-business collaboration, and that takes different forms. At least that's what I'm taking away from some of the things you're saying. I would be remiss if I don't ask you one last and very important question, which is, so much of the tech race and American reindustrialization and tech competitiveness depends on our workforce, our people. Could you share with us your wisdom on this point?
Well, it all comes down to people, doesn't it? Or it all goes back to the creative ideas that are harnessed by, in this case, individual Americans that go out and do something useful with these ideas. And the CHIPS and Science Act could be thought of as an investment in human capital. I often think of it in those terms. So through the CHIPS Act, I think it was well reported in my state that Purdue University has been training a number of folks, very sophisticated electrical engineers and people in material science so that they can work in the semiconductor industry. Indiana University also doing very important work in this field and in the area of informatics, and many of them are contributing after graduation mightily to the DoD and nearby Crane Naval Base, its mission to develop and optimize next-generation technologies. Ivy Tech Community College, which is our statewide community college system, has developed a dedicated training program that will hand out certificates to Hoosiers and those who locate in the Hoosier state for semiconductor work so that they can be technicians at these fabs. If we don't have a requisite supply of capable workers, we won't be landing the foreign direct investment that is necessary. This was a key point of emphasis for Secretary Raimondo in implementation of the CHIPS and Science Act. She and our Secretary of State visited Purdue University to highlight the importance of this issue a couple of years ago following the CHIPS Act. We need more people to sign up. And it's not just for semiconductors, for other areas of emerging tech so that they can help us win this tech power competition from the technician level up to the postdoc level, and so that our values prevail, not the values of the Chinese Communist Party, so that we can have some rules-based order based on our Enlightenment values of the Declaration of Independence, not the law of the jungle. It all comes down to having trained people. And I would put in this one final word to demonstrate that I don't think everything needs to be done in national capitals. We need a better, a more effective pre-K through 14 system. We need to better educate our young people. We need to inspire them in this age of technology to study seriously science, tech, engineering, math, and have more than a passing familiarity with these technologies and their importance so that we can produce a highly productive workforce that can become rich and lead meaningful lives. And we bring everyone along, also part of the CHIPS Act, so that we can invest in all geographies and we will have people capable of providing the sorts of services that are needed by these tech companies. I think we can do it. I think we're up to the task. But that, as much as anything else, is the generational challenge as it relates to tech power in the United States.
That's a powerful message, Senator. Thank you. Thank you for joining us and your leadership across the country on this important issue. We are delighted to start with you on this podcast series, and I hope it catches fire. And we'll be watching what you're doing next. So thank you, sir. And I want to thank the audience for joining this inspiring conversation with Senator Young. You could find this episode of Betting on America and more on csis.org, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is Navin Girishankar reminding you that